This lecture video is designed to provide a brief overview of the United States Constitution. The United States Constitution is one of the most brilliant political documents ever composed. America's instrument of government detailing how its government will function represents a pinnacle in political science. The United States Constitution was the product of many political struggles, debates, and innovations, particularly in the classical period and European civilization. Americans, in many ways, were able to benefit from the mistakes and triumphs that others experienced in previous centuries, and when the drafters of the Constitution were done, they were able to compose a document that borrowed on 2,000 years of experiments in government, while at the same time composed something radically new and daring. The United States Constitution still remains today as one of the greatest statements on the role of government, how to craft a government that represents first and foremost the people, and how to distribute and check power in a manner that had never been achieved in its like before. The United States Constitution was composed at the Constitutional Convention that convened in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the summer of 1787. Many of the delegates to the convention had also signed America's Declaration of Independence, or they had fought in or at least supported America's Revolutionary War. Many of them had put everything on the line for the formation of the new nation, but many of them were concerned the new government of the nation was already floundering. The Articles of Confederation, America's first constitution, had created a government that was so fearful of centralized power that it almost had no power. The Articles of Confederation were difficult to amend. It was difficult to pass a law. There was nearly no power to tax to provide money for the government to function. There was also no enforcement of the law. In an effort to make changes and improve the government of the new republic, delegates came together in a hot and sticky Philadelphia from May to September in 1787. The delegates met together once again in the Pennsylvania State House, now known as Independence Hall, where the Declaration of Independence had been signed 11 years earlier. Although they came to just recommend changes to the established Articles of Confederation, in the end, they ended up drafting a whole new document for government. The document they composed remains the foundational document of the government of the United States today, and is one of the most consequential statements on statecraft ever produced. A total of 55 delegates attended the convention. They each represented now an independent state and reflected a broad range of views and backgrounds. A large plurality of the delegates acknowledged the need for revising the Articles of Confederation, but many differences and debates existed between them. In the end, 39 of the 55 delegates would end up signing the newly drafted Constitution. Many of the debates that occurred during the convention would continue well into the years ahead. Still today, Americans are debating some of the issues raised originally at the Constitutional Convention. Certainly a large part of the success of the convention lay in the presence of George Washington. Washington's presence was key as he was the most trusted individual in the early republic. Everyone knew he could be trusted with questions of power because after winning the Revolutionary War with the Continental Army, he did not use the army for his own benefit, but rather laid down his authority after the war and surrendered his sword to Congress. Thus, for a convention that was going to discuss the size and scope and power of a stronger central government, having Washington in attendance lent credibility to the convention and assuaged some fears that the delegates were secretly plotting their own power grab over the nation. Washington was elected president of the convention. He said little during its proceedings, but it was not his words that mattered, but rather the legitimacy that his presence lent to the convention's proceedings that was invaluable. Without question, one of the most irreplaceable luminaries in attendance at the convention was a delegate from the state of Virginia, James Madison. Madison was only 36 years old in the year of the Constitutional Convention, but his previous studies on the nature of government would prove to be an indispensable asset to the convention's proceedings. Madison arrived at the convention with essentially a draft for a new instrument of government. His document would be vigorously debated at the convention, but we can see in Madison's ideas the beginnings of a new federal constitution. After 4 months of debate, division, and compromise, the delegates emerged with a new document to be submitted before the people for ratification, which would create a new government for the young United States. The Constitution of the United States opens with the preamble, which serves as an introduction to the document, and then follows with 7 chapters called Articles that address various branches and issues for the American government. The first 3 articles of the Constitution detail the nature and power of America's 3 branches of government: the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Article 4 delineates the relationship between the several states and the relationship of the states to the national government. Article 5 provides means for the changing or amending of the Constitution. Article 6 addresses issues of national debts, the supremacy of national law, as well as oaths. Article 7 provides a process for the Constitution to be submitted to the states and ratified or approved by the states. Let's take a quick look at each part of the Constitution. The preamble to the United States Constitution is one of the most succinct statements ever written regarding the functions of good government. It also provides one of the most declarative and affirmative statements regarding the role and power of the people of a state, even over the government they have fashioned themselves. The Constitution begins with the powerful and extraordinary words, "We the people." Notice the source of power, the source of government. It is the people. The document does not begin with the words, "I, His Majesty the King." Neither does it commence with the words, "The leader of the nation decrees." Neither does it find the basis of political power in the rich and established classes, those of noble and special birth, a single political party, or the military leadership of a nation. Rather, the source of all power in the American government is in the we. It is in the power of the people of the nation themselves. It is the people of the nation who have seen fit to craft this government. The necessity is stated as to create a more perfect union. That was a very much needed objective due to the deficiencies inherent to the Articles of Confederation. A more perfect union was needed. The objectives of this new government will be to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty for the drafters of the Constitution as well as their posterity, that is, their descendants. These were the purposes for the drafting of the Constitution. It is important to emphasize that when Americans refer to the Constitution, they are referring to a written and ratified document. Other nations, such as the United Kingdom, when they refer to their Constitution, they are not referring to a specific singular document. Rather, they are referencing the collective laws and traditions of the nation, making up how that nation is constituted. The United States Constitution is a written, singular document, drafted by the people, ratified by the people, and able to be changed by the people. These are some of the unique features of the United States constitutional tradition. The preamble provides an introduction and general statement on the purpose and function of government. The remainder of the document, originally drafted, is broken into several sections referred to as articles. Let us briefly review the contents of each article. Article 1 outlines the legislative branch of the United States, collectively referred to as the Congress of the United States. The Congress is composed of 2 houses, or chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives is composed of 435 members based on the population of each state. Each representative serves a 2-year term, must be at least 25 years of age, and must have been a citizen for at least 7 years before their election. The United States Senate is composed of 100 members. 2 are elected from each of the 50 states in the Union. Senators serve 6-year terms, must be at least 30 years old at the time of their election, and have been a citizen for at least 9 years before they are elected. As the legislative branch, The Congress has the power to make all laws it deems necessary and proper for the general welfare of the United States. Those laws must be passed by both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and then signed by the President and upheld as law by the Supreme Court. The powers of Congress are numerous, including the power to tax, borrow money, regulate commerce, coin money, declare war, and maintain an army and a navy. The Congress is an important component in the separation of powers and in the checks and balances inherent to the United States Constitution. Article 2 of the United States Constitution outlines the nature and powers of the executive branch. There was no executive branch or chief executive officer under the Articles of Confederation. Thus, Article 2 was a new and significant development in the new federal Constitution. Under the United States Constitution, the highest individual in the government charged with enforcing the laws passed by the legislative branch is the Chief Executive Officer of the United States, designated as the President under the Constitution. The President of the United States leads the entire executive branch, and it is his responsibility to sign or veto laws of Congress, and he is tasked with enforcing the laws of the United States. The President of the United States must be at least 35 years old at the time of his election. The President cannot be an immigrant even if he is a naturalized citizen. He must also have lived in the United States for the previous 14 years before his election to office. The President is elected by the people through the Electoral College and serves a 4-year term. The President exercises important powers, including Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the United States, the power to appoint ambassadors, judges, officers of the Cabinet, and other public ministers. The President can be removed through impeachment for high crimes and misdemeanors upon being convicted in a trial by the Senate. The President is limited to 2 4-year terms. Article 3 of the Constitution outlines the nature and powers of the judicial branch. The fundamental power of the judicial branch is to interpret the laws of the United States to confirm that they are constitutional, that they do not violate the provisions of the Constitution of the United States. Although the judicial branch refers to the entirety of the court system in the United States, the highest court in the land is the Supreme Court. Justices of the Supreme Court are appointed by the President, but need to be confirmed by the Senate. Appointments to the Supreme Court are for life and tend to be for many years. The Supreme Court can uphold or overturn decisions of lower federal courts and is the final word in the land regarding legal suits. Article 4 of the Constitution includes both the full faith and credit clause and the privileges and immunities clause. The full faith and credit clause requires that each state respect the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state. This clause is designed to prevent interstate rivalry and the assertion of one state's power to exceed that of another. The Privileges and Immunities Clause protects citizens of one state in another state. A citizen of one state cannot be discriminated against in another state regarding their fundamental rights unless there is a substantial justification and no less restrictive means. For example, a student convicted of a crime in one state cannot escape to another state for sanctuary. That would be discrimination by one state against another state's laws and judicial proceedings. Article 4 of the Constitution also prevents the creation of a new state, a union of 2 or more states, or the reconstitution of a state without the approval of Congress and the relevant state legislatures. Article 4 also guarantees a Republican, that is democratic, form of government for each of the United States. The Congress also is charged in this article with the responsibility of protecting each of the states from foreign invasion and, when called upon, against domestic uprisings. Article 5 of the Constitution outlines the process by which the Constitution can be amended, that is, changed. There are 2 procedures by which the Constitution can be amended. The first approach commences with Congress. If 2/3 of both chambers of Congress propose an amendment, it is then submitted to the states for ratification. The secondary means by which the Constitution can be amended is if 2/3 of the state legislatures call a national convention and propose an amendment and then submit it back to the states for ratification. Regardless if the proposed amendment change commences in Congress or within a national convention, the proposed amendment must be either ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures or ratified by conventions held in 3/4 of the states. Notice that the power to amend the Constitution is squarely within the hands of the people, as theoretically, the people could circumvent the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of the national government to secure an amendment and change the United States Constitution. All but one amendment to the Constitution has been proposed by Congress and ratified by the state legislatures. Only the 21st Amendment was proposed in Congress and ratified by state conventions. No amendment to the Constitution has ever been proposed by a national convention convened by the states and then ratified by the state legislatures or by a state convention. 4 varied topics are addressed in Article 6 of the Constitution. Article 6 asserts that any debts incurred by the United States before the ratification of the Constitution will still be required to be paid by the United States under the Constitution. The drafters did not want anyone to think that changing America's form of government would provide a means for the United States to avoid paying its debts during the Revolutionary period. Article 6 also includes a direct statement regarding the new federal system that the Constitution was intending to create. It declares the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and that all the treaties of the United States and all its judges are bound to the federal Constitution. Article 6 is clear that there will not be additional legal bodies or demonstrations of national sovereignty apart from those established and under the Constitution of the United States. Article 6 also mandates a loyalty oath by all members of Congress and all officers of the government, not to an individual, idea, party, or faction, but rather to the Constitution itself. The final clause prohibits any religious test for federal office. No member of the government can be required to be a part of a specific religious group or faction. Article 7 is the last article of the United States Constitution, sometimes referred to as the Ratification Clause. The drafters of the Constitution required 9 of the original 13 states to ratify or approve the Constitution in order for it to become the law of the land. If 9 of the original 13 did not ratify the Constitution, then the federal system outlined in the Constitution would not come into existence, and presumably the United States would remain under the Articles of Confederation. It was also unclear what would happen if 9 of 13 states did ratify the Constitution and the document was the law of the land. What would happen to a state or more that did not ratify the Constitution? This scenario actually occurs in Rhode Island, which did not ratify the Constitution initially. The state existed in a strange limbo for approximately 2 years until Rhode Island ratified the document. The United States Constitution established a government that demonstrated the separation of powers and 3 co-equal branches of government. The Constitution is based on the premise that power is best employed when it is distributed, and no one individual, group, or branch has unlimited power of government. Each branch has substantial powers of government, particularly broad powers over its respective field of government. Many of each branch's powers are enumerated, that is, specifically stated, in the Constitution. Other powers are implied in a reference to a specific branch. Still others are considered inherent to a specific branch of government. None of the 3 branches of government have infinite powers or powers that cannot be checked and balanced by an alternate branch of government. Each branch of government, each power of government, is required to work in consort with the other branches and other powers of government. It is important to note that in crafting a system of government that was based on checks and balances, checking the power of Congress, checking the power of the presidency, checking the power of the courts, that the framers also saw the need to check the power of the people. They were intent on crafting a system in which every decision is not conducted by majority rule, and there is no need for leaders, as the people, just make all their own decisions all the time. The constitutional framers were very suspicious and fearful of direct democracy. The convention delegates believed individual man cannot be trusted with power. He will inevitably abuse it. Neither can crowds, mobs, and packs of people whipped into a frenzy by various demagogues be considered responsible enough to make important decisions. The framers preferred men of property, men of education, and men of experience to lead the nation. The people need to be able to vote, but they do not need to vote on every single decision every single time. Thus, the word democracy was not an appealing word for the constitutional framers, certainly not a word they always esteemed. Democracy in the 18th century tended to mean rule by mobs, the majority crushing minorities, and violence deciding things in the end among contentious parties. The framers preferred a republican form of government, not capital R Republican as in today's modern Republican Party, but rather lowercase r Republican, a government that the people have a voice in and can vote and elect their own representatives. But once they vote, those representatives use their own experience and talents to make decisions for their constituents. They lead the people and are not a puppet of the people. They make independent decisions. If the people oppose their decisions, then the people have the opportunity to vote them out of office upon the completion of their term. Every decision is not majority rules. Minorities are protected from an oppressive majority. A republic places a check on the whims and trends of the voters' affections. Leaders should be empowered to be leaders, still accountable to the people. The United States would gradually evolve into a democracy over the following century, but the framers originally aimed at creating a republic rather than a democracy. The drafters and early supporters of the new Constitution quickly assumed the title of Federalists, that is, those that supported a new and revised system of government known as federalism, in which the power of the central government would be greater than those of the states, as outlined by the proposed Constitution. The Federalists included such political minds as Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. Collectively, they believed the Articles of Confederation were too weak. A stronger central government was necessary to function and control the states. Established men of experience and talent should govern. They believed a stronger national government would protect the rights of the people. The new Constitution would work in consort with the states to protect the individual freedoms of the people. They also advocated for separating church and state in the governance of the nation. The Federalists outlined their endorsements of the proposed Constitution in a series of essays that became known as the Federalist Papers. The essays of the Federalist Papers were often published in newspapers and tackled such issues as the need for a new constitution, the value of a bicameral or two-house legislature, the importance of a strong executive, and the need for an independent judiciary. The arguments of the Federalists were countered by those of the Anti-Federalists. Although many of the Anti-Federalists had supported the American Revolution and the war against Great Britain, many of them did not want to see the infant United States become an all-powerful state, just like they had revolted against in the war against Britain. Anti-Federalists, such as Patrick Henry, George Mason, and Samuel Adams, either outright opposed the proposed Constitution or at least expressed grave reservations. They believed in the value of the Articles of Confederation. They opposed central government. They believed creating a stronger central government would threaten the power of individual states. Their concerns about the proposed Constitution were many. They felt it favored just the wealthy and powerful. It lacked a bill or clear statement on the specific rights of the people. They disliked the fact that the Constitution would go into effect and become the law of the land simply on the basis of a 2/3 ratification vote among the several states. They also opposed the omission of any reference to God in the Constitution and believed the document to be too secular, maybe even sacrilegious. After the completion of the Constitution in September of 1787, the document was submitted to the states for their ratification, that is, to decide if they would accept this new design of government. Each of the 13 states had a ratifying convention to debate the document. Federalists and Anti-Federalists vigorously debated the document on both sides. In many states, it seemed the Anti-Federalists held larger numbers. But increasingly, the arguments of the Federalists were so convincing that one state after another began voting to accept, adopt, and ratify the new federal constitution. Delaware was the first to ratify the document. The large state of Pennsylvania was next, followed by New Jersey, Georgia, and Connecticut. The Massachusetts ratifying convention was quite polarized. Anti-Federalists at the Massachusetts Convention offered one argument after another why the document should not be adopted. The legendary revolutionary and leader of the Sons of Liberty, Samuel Adams, initially was in the camp of the Anti-Federalists. But the arguments of the Federalists were increasingly persuasive, and Adams was intrigued. He wanted the convention to take the document seriously and not rush the vote. Near the end of the convention, an old, sick, and frail appearance by the great revolutionary John Hancock captivated the convention. In a raspy voice, he urged the convention delegates to ratify the document. In the end, Massachusetts paved the way forward for other hesitating states. The state convention agreed to ratify the new Constitution with the qualification that a Bill of Rights, a statement, was included with the Constitution that guaranteed individual rights and liberties. Other states, like the example Massachusetts set, and also with the requirement of a Bill of Rights, other states adopted the document as well. Maryland and South Carolina voted to ratify. Once New Hampshire voted to ratify, then the needed 9 states were in place for the implementation of the Constitution. But everyone knew the new document would not be truly successful unless the large states in population, such as Virginia and New York, also voted to ratify. By the summer of 1788, these 2 states did vote to ratify. North Carolina was next, and Rhode Island did not ratify until May of 1790. To meet the demands of the ratifying states, James Madison picked up his pen once again and composed an additional set of changes or amendments to the Constitution. This additional document would provide a specific statement summarizing individual liberties guaranteed by the Constitution for citizens of the United States. In the end, the Bill of Rights would form the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. Amendment 1. Congress will make no law establishing a certain religion. Neither will Congress prohibit citizens from freely exercising their religion. Neither can Congress pass a law abridging the freedom of the speech of the people, restricting the freedom of the press, preventing the people from assembling in peace, or preventing them from petitioning the government to address their grievances. Amendment 2 guarantees the right of the people of the United States to keep and bear arms. Amendment 3 prevents the government from quartering or housing soldiers in a citizen's house without the owner's consent. Amendment 4 prevents unreasonable searches and seizures of people's homes and a search warrant being issued to authorities without at least probable cause. Amendment 5 guarantees the right of habeas corpus. A citizen cannot be held against their will without being charged with a crime. This amendment also prohibits a citizen from double jeopardy, that is, being tried for the same crime more than once. Neither can a defendant be forced to testify in court, nor can a citizen be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Amendment 6 guarantees citizens a speedy and public trial, an impartial jury, notification of the charges against them, the right to confront witnesses, the right to obtain witnesses on their behalf, and the right to have counsel, that is, a lawyer, for their defense. Amendment 7 guarantees the right to a jury trial. Amendment 8 prohibits excessive bail being applied to a defendant, as well as cruel and unusual punishments being inflicted on the convicted. Amendment 9 prevents the Bill of Rights from being construed to think only these rights are the rights of the people. Just because these rights are being enumerated here in this document, it does not permit it to be concluded that the people do not also retain other rights and liberties that are equally valid and important. Amendment 10 states that all powers not granted to the United States Constitution or that are prohibited to the states are therefore given to the states and the people. That is, any powers of government not specifically assigned to the federal government or blocked to the states are therefore state powers. The Bill of Rights was ratified in December 1791 and became the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 of what would, as of today, become 27 amendments to the Constitution. The Bill of Rights was the last of several compromises that were conducted in the drafting of the Constitution. Perhaps the largest compromise that terminated weeks and weeks of debate became known as the Great Compromise. Small state delegations at the convention wanted a unicameral, that is, single-chamber Congress whose members represented individual states. Each state would have the same number of representatives in Congress. States with larger populations, however, felt that such a system would not adequately represent their large populations. They did not feel that a small state should hold the same number of votes in Congress as a state with a large population. To break the impasse, convention delegates adopted the same model that had been written into the Massachusetts state constitution. The Great Compromise formed a bicameral Congress, a two-house, two-chamber national legislature comprised of the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives members would be based on population, therefore states with larger populations would send more members to the House. The Senate would be based on state representation. Each state would send 2 senators each to the chamber. Thus, each state had equal representation in the Senate. The Great Compromise, the creation of a bicameral national legislature in Congress, was one of the most important compromises that led to the creation of the United States Constitution. Another important compromise at the convention was the creation of the Electoral College. Some delegates, fearful of the power of a chief executive or president, wanted the president to be elected by state legislatures, thus keeping the vote out of the direct hands of the people. Other delegates wanted a more direct democracy approach in which the people directly voted for the president, and the winner of the popular vote, the candidate who received the most votes, was therefore elected president. The Electoral College was formed as a compromise between these two positions. Under the eventual system ratified, the president would not be elected directly by the people or solely by the state legislatures. Rather, a group of electors representing each state, the same number of electors as each state's number of congressional representatives, would form a collegium, or collection that would represent their respective states and then vote for a president representing their state. Thus, states with larger populations would send more electors to the Electoral College, but in order for an individual to win the presidency, he or she would have to receive the majority of votes cast among the electors in the college, that is, at least 51%. The Electoral College served as yet another check or balance on power in the Constitution. It provided a check against mob mentality in presidential elections. Presumably, electors would diminish the popular whims of the voters and represent the people's will even as they balanced it against other important considerations. Unquestionably, the most controversial of compromises formed during the Constitutional Convention was the so-called 3/5 Compromise. There was only a brief discussion at the convention regarding the possibility of including a clause in the document to permanently abolish slavery in the United States. Yet the Southern states refused to include such a provision, and everyone was aware that including such a clause would mean the Constitution would not have been ratified by the needed number of states. Yet even as Southern states opposed the abolition of slavery, Southern delegates realized the potential political weight that the 1 million or so slaves in their region could grant their states on the level of the national legislature, Congress. Northern states opposed slaves being counted as part of a Southern state's population, because slaves could not vote anyway. To break the impasse, the so-called 3/5 Compromise was crafted. For the purposes of population numbers, that is, counting the number of congressional members or electors in the Electoral College each Southern state would have, every 5 slaves would be counted as 3 free residents of a state. Thus, by 3/5 counting the slaves, Southern states gained larger congressional delegations and electors in the Electoral College. The North accepted the compromise because for the purposes of taxation, determining the amount of taxes a state would have to pay to the national government, slaves were also included in the counting of a state's population, but again, only as 3/5 of a free person. The 3/5 compromise, in effect, showed that the drafters of the Constitution considered black slaves only 3/5 of a white person. The drafters failed to abolish slavery in the drafting of the Constitution, but the rights and liberties enshrined in the document would eventually lead to its abolition over time, and eventually the ratification of the 13th Amendment in 1865 would see to the permanent end of slavery in the United States. The final product of the United States Constitution and the government it established is one very large compromise. Those in the early republics, such as Alexander Hamilton, who favored a more centralized form of government that leaned in the direction of monarchy, did not get all that they wanted. Those, such as the Anti-Federalists, who favored placing the power of government almost exclusively in the hands of the states, also did not get the particular system they desired. The United States' first form of government under the Articles of Confederation formed a confederacy, a form of government in which a central government exists but is clearly surrounded and subordinated by the states and their respective legislatures. But the original Confederacy was judged too weak to meet the challenges of the early republic. It could not suppress rebellions, could not tax effectively, and could not be changed easily. The form of government that the Constitutional Convention delegates crafted was federalism. By creating a federation of states subsumed to a central government, the new central government was empowered to meet the challenges of the early republic. States still retained significant authority. The 10th Amendment specifically relegated powers and decisions not even contemplated yet to the respective states. But under the Constitution, the federal central government would now have the power to govern a growing nation and be granted the authority to solve the problems that nation would face long into the future.